APS, they're trying to give the impression that we're here for you.
I think APS is doing a great job of reaching out to its customers.
That's a fair question for consumers like me. Are we operating in a rigged system?
We're very proud of the work that we do. Our customers have choices, and we are able to do that intentionally.
Far too many people, unfortunately, continue to struggle to pay their bills.
Our code of ethics came to us at a time where our commission was experiencing some real corruption. This board is indeed above reproach.
This is Power and Influence, a discussion that begins this week and will continue as long as needed. Why? Utilities in this state don't just deliver power, they wield it politically, economically. Their regulators also have immense influence over the direction our state heads in years to come. The wealth gap, resilience to climate change, survivability, and at the most basic level, the cost of your utility bills. Today, we focus on the upcoming APS rate case with some esteemed guests. Karen Potter to my left with Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, a nonprofit funded by government and private donors that support the alternative energy industry. Also, we have Justin Olson, a Republican just finishing a term on the Corporation Commission. I'm sure you're taking a big breath.
That's right, enjoying some time away.
Yeah. And Bill Mundell, a Democrat currently in the Attorney General's office who spent a decade on the Corporation Commission with some valuable institutional knowledge for us, for sure. All right, first I want to bring home why the five-member elected Corporation Commission matters. You know, it's probably the least understood government body, but so powerful. Bill, why should we care about what the commissioners do, especially during this time we live in?
Well, let me just say this to our new residents in Arizona. In most states, it's called the Public Utilities Commission or the Public Service Commission. So the name is very misleading. Most people think you just file to start a business. But the way I describe it is, if you turn on an air conditioner, flush a toilet, cook or heat with natural gas, cross a railroad crossing, use gasoline, invest in stocks and bonds, or start a business, then a decision by the Corporation Commission has impacted your life.
Absolutely. Justin, your elevator speech for why the Corporation Commission matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a firm believer in free markets, and I think that the framers of our state constitution were as well, but they recognized that utilities were a natural monopoly, meaning that if you had a free market, then you would only have one provider, and that monopoly would be able to charge whatever it wanted for those services. And so they put in place the next best alternative to a free, perfectly competitive marketplace, and that is a regulated marketplace. And so you have these monopolies that are granted that ability to operate as a monopoly, but they can only charge what is allowed by the Corporation Commission. The Corporation Commission's job is to put in place the rates that would be charged if the monopoly were in fact operating in a perfectly competitive marketplace.
Yeah, and I know you have more to say about competition, but maybe that may be another day.
That's right.
So here we are. APS is on deck for a major rate case. Rate cases determine what you pay for power and water, at least for the utilities that fall under the commission's domain, right? Karen, how do interveners like your group help shape this conversation?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Joe. And I'll kind of start by answering that question with, it's important to remember that the commission is a quasi-judicial body that has significant influence on infrastructure that each of us uses in our everyday lives. So the impact and the influence is often incalculable and far-reaching. So organizations like mine, there's a major process for being engaged in utility rate making. And that process is usually jump-started by the utility filing a rate application at the commission. There's a discussion of, crossing the T's, dotting the I's to make sure all of the necessary paperwork is a part of that application. And once that's determined sufficient, interveners like my organization, we intervene in every single utility rate case, and many other interveners engage in a process to better understand, is what the utility is asking for, is it prudent? Is it in the public interest? And is it fair not only to the utility, because there is an element of reasonable financial return, but also is it okay for the customers to bear that risk and to bear those costs that they're asking for? So organizations like myself and many others, for many different reasons, influencing or representing residential customers, non-residential commercial, C&I customers, industrial, they all are asking different questions to get at the same aim, is if this rate case or if what is in this application is in the public interest.
A lot of people forget it's not just homeowners, it's businesses, schools, churches, right? They're the ones also paying the bills, etc.
Everybody that pays for utilities.
Absolutely. Now, for APS's rate case, public comment begins in June. The utility has presented its plan for a rate increase and a menu of options and discounts to the ratepayers. APS, as we mentioned, it's a regulated monopoly. It's why it's so important the Commission gets it right. APS is proposing new time-of-use holidays, more support for limited income customers, investments in the grid, what they call competitive clean energy investments, and more. Those all sound good. The question is, at what cost? APS wants to raise its return on investment above 10%. Right now, it's between 8 and 9%. Now, there's disagreement of what the actual impact to bills will be. APS says its proposed rate structure will increase residential customer bills an average of 13%. That's residential only. Impact varies based on energy use and rate plan, right? Well, RUCO says its calculations show a deeper impact, an average bill increase of 26% for residents and businesses combined. So, devil will be in the details, right, as we move forward. Justin, as these hearings proceed, how will we know where the truth lies?
Yeah, that's the critical question, and that's why it's so important that we elect folks to the Corporation Commission that take that job extremely seriously. Because the Corporation Commission has to actually dig into these details, the filings of the company, the filings of RUCO, the presentations from staff, and actually parse all of the competing information to get to the reality so that the customers are in fact protected and that the rates that are charged do not exceed what's allowed under the Constitution, that just and reasonable return on the investments of the utility.
Yeah, so Bill, in your experience, is the process, is it working to really understand where the truth lies in terms of what's being predicted?
Well, it really depends on who the commissioners are. When you say, is it working? I mean, we know in one of the last rate cases, there's a settlement, and a lot of times there are settlements, but it wasn't closely scrutinized. It was just brought basically to the commissioners and they rubber stamped it, meaning they didn't have hearings, they didn't take testimony. When I was there, even if they brought a settlement, you know, the parties don't want the commissioners to delve into it, but we would say, I don't care if it's a settlement or a litigated matter, we're going to hold a hearing and we're going to get into the devil's in the details, as you said, Joe. And so it really depends on how the commissioners act and respond to the evidence and the facts that are before them. And as was noted earlier, the commission is quasi-judicial. I mean, you have a hearing, which like a trial.
Yeah.
And you have lawyers, and you have witnesses, and you have accountants, and you have engineers testify, and you have cross-examination, and you have discovery prior to the hearing taking place. So it really depends on the individual commissioners and how thorough they get into the evidence, into the weeds.
Yeah, Karen, what will be your goal more than anything through this APS rate case?
One of the goals that SWEEP is looking at in particular is to make sure that the process is simple for consumers to understand and that they understand what options that are available to them to reduce their monthly electric bills as much as possible. The rate cases are incredibly complex with all of the components that Bill just noted, and it's really it's understandable that the commission or that the public does not understand all these components of these rate cases, nor should they be expected to always dive deep into these details. That's why it's really important for the commission, for stakeholders, and for others to make this process simple for the public.
That leads us to the 2017 rate case. You had two grassroots activists, also two independent reports, commissioners acting on tips and information, and the Attorney General coming together to expose big problems. Here's a quick look back. Business owner and activist Stacey Champion is leading a charge on behalf of customers, arguing to a judge the actual average bill impact experienced by residential customers is significantly greater than the 4.5% projection.
It's not just me saying it, it's thousands and thousands of APS customers.
It's a company that raised rates in 2017 and made them so confusing that its own employees can't explain the rate oftentimes. And at the same time, it's been extremely profitable.
These records also show the company ended up with more cash on hand last year than was projected or even allowed.
Well, lo and behold, the audit report comes out and says
APS is over-earning.
A new independent report slams Arizona's largest power company, APS, for not doing enough to help customers save money on their bills.
The report concludes APS ignored most feedback from consumer organizations when it developed the plan. It failed to include components of what's considered a reasonable customer education plan.
And APS's rate structure is too complicated.
That's Stephen Jennings of AARP.
I think it becomes clear that APS has failed in its obligations to its customers.
We have not met your, nor our own, expectations.
A new era begins with an apology and a vow to make amends.
It is our responsibility to do better.
Most agreed the surprise announcement from the Attorney General regarding restitution from APS is a big deal.
It's validation.
It shows that APS misrepresented the situation.
I don't want to get too much into the details, but in the process, how can citizens know that the process to determine the next rate structure is transparent, fair, and will hold APS accountable after the fact? Thoughts?
You know, I think you mentioned, the rate structure. I think that's the key, or can be one of the confusing components. And what we saw when I got appointed to the commission in 2017, shortly after that decision was made, it was reported that this was going to be a 4.5% increase, about an average of $6 for the average customer. Well, most folks did not experience that average impact. Some saw some actual decreases, others saw substantial increases, and those were offset and got to that average that very few folks actually saw. And so it really gets to that complexity of, are there big changes in the rate design? And if so, then you're going to see this disparate impact.
Thoughts watching that, Bill?
Well, I would just say that, RUCO is there. It was established in the 1980s, the Residential Utility Consumer Office, to protect residential consumers, because at that time, the utilities were getting rate increases after rate increases, and no one was there to represent residential consumers. So it was established. It's in the executive branch of government, and I would just say they need to do their job. They were involved in that settlement, and as I noted earlier, there was no hearing to really delve into the details, as Justin mentioned. And if RUCO does their job, as established by statute, then the public should feel pretty confident that what the end result is fair.
Cynthia Zwick leading RUCO now. We look forward to talking to her in the future. They do have an important role. I mean, you're saying there weren't hearings, but I mean, there were lots of stakeholders giving input, right, for the 2017 rate case. Was SWEEP involved?
SWEEP was involved in that rate case.
And so what was your experience in putting it together? Because the question is, what's going to happen this time?
So I think one thing to keep in mind with these issues, it's important to look at a high-level view of all of the factors impacting a rate request, right? These issues are not developed in a vacuum. Utility systems, rates that customers are going to eventually pay. This is all determined on what's happening across the state, economically, politically, and based on other consumer issues as well. So we have to kind of keep that in mind.
You had a say in 2017, right? Yeah. You contributed. Mm-hmm. One of the audits showed, though, that APS ultimately didn't incorporate many of the... Did you see that happening in 18 and 19? Were people raising red flags?
Well, for my organization in particular, SWEEP, we were interveners in that now infamous rate case, and we did not sign that settlement. We had a lot of concerns with the rate structure.
You didn't sign off on it.
And, and let me just clarify, there were a lot of hearings prior, and there was an initial recommendation that by staff that the rates stay the same, and RUCO recommended the rates go down. And then all of a sudden, behind closed doors, we get this settlement. The people of Arizona get a settlement where there's going to be a rate increase. So that's when I say there was no hearings on the settlement. That changed overnight behind closed doors with staff, with RUCO, and with APS. We need to be clear about that.
Okay, interesting. I just want to touch on this. It's a bigger topic for another day, but what role should fossil fuel emissions have in determining rate cases and energy policy? Because it's being discussed right now, and there are questions about whether there will be further scale backs of sustainability policies. Should it play a role? Does the Commission have an obligation to make sure that we're heading in a direction that decarbonizes the energy sector? Justin?
My approach at the Commission was that the constitutional role of the Commission is very clear, and that is pure and simply to ensure that the utility is earning a just and reasonable rate of return and nothing in excess of that. And so My concern with putting on additional requirements on the utilities that you're actually driving up the cost of utilities beyond what is constitutionally permissible. My view is that if there is a role of government to reduce or to require a reduction in carbon emissions, that's at the legislative level and the governor's responsibility.
Bill's smiling.
Not surprising, Justin. I disagree a little bit on this.
Okay.
You know, there is the statute, the line siting and power plant statute, that says that the commission, when they're deciding, on electricity, we need to make sure we have adequate, reliable, economical electricity, at the same time protecting it uses the old term ecology, but the environment of the state of Arizona. So there's a balancing act there. I mean, I agree partially with Justin, but adequate, economical, reliable electricity at the same time protecting the ecology of the state of Arizona. And that's not just Bill Mundell thinking it's a great idea, it's by state statute.
Earlier this year, consumer advocate Abhay Padgaonkar raised concerns about potential conflict of interest. We're talking about the Code of Ethics right now, the commission. He was concerned about communications with commissioners and investors of utilities. Obviously, the public deserves to know commissioners are not playing favorites. 3 of 5 commissioners voted in that case to not officially investigate the matter. But it's what Chair Jim O'Connor said after the vote that seems to leave a big open-ended question. Take a listen.
Our Code of Ethics came to us at a time where our commission was experiencing some real corruption. These are very different times. This board is indeed above reproach. We are all about transparency, and weaponizing a code of ethics against sitting commissioners with zero evidence. Not right, not appropriate, and not on my watch.
Justin, you helped write the current Code of Ethics. What do you think watching that?
I don't know any of the specifics that are surrounding any of the accusations of violations of ex parte, but I can just comment in general, and that is that I think that the Code of Ethics is very important. It's important for the commission to ensure that the public has that confidence in the commission to act in a judicial manner. And so that's why it's important that we follow that judicial code of ethics.
So here, Chair O'Connor make a blanket statement and say this commission is above reproach. Is that really the attitude we should have?
I think that it's the responsibility of every commissioner to police their own actions to ensure that the public can have that confidence that there is no violations of ex parte, that there are no inappropriate communications that are taking place or any inappropriate conflicts of interest as well.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Bill, this, and Karen, but there seems to be a dilemma here going forward. Yes, O'Connor, Thompson, and Meyer voted not to further investigate this particular case. It was about Commissioner Thompson's trip to meet with investors of the oil and gas industry in New York, his public comments afterwards, vowing to deregulate Arizona further. Putting that aside, though, it remains unclear how the Code of Ethics should be applied. Because commissioners, we know, also meet with solar business leaders, some who are not registered as lobbyists. Bill, is there a problem here with the way the Code of Ethics is written?
Again, Justin deserves credit for, drafting and voting for the Code of Ethics. But at the time, I said, well, it's a great first start. You can drive a Mack truck through it. There were some areas that I think should have been strengthened. So. And then I think the statement by the chairman is a little self-serving. I mean, it's like the fox guarding the chicken coop. I'm an honest guy. I'm ethical. We don't need anybody looking at my behavior. I mean, I've been following the commission for, as we noted in the opening, for over 20 years, and there's been instance of corruption by commissioners or allegations of corruption by commissioners. I mean, one commissioner when I was there resigned because he was improperly impacting a merger. Another commissioner resigned because she had a conflict, because she represented an industry that was regulated by the commission. One commissioner was indicted. There was a mistrial. So to say, this commission is above reproach is, as I said, self-serving. We need a code of ethics. It needs to be strengthened, in my opinion. I don't know what they mean by the facts I mean, that's what what I thought should have been done, similar to what happens to judges, where you have an independent commission. So, I don't know all the
There was
facts.
not an official investigation. It was only behind closed doors conversation.
So the question is,
so they voted not to have the investigation.
Right. So then how do you know who paid for the trip?
Sure. Commissioner Thompson has said it was all above board. Commission paid for this. No,
may be.
no conflict. And we're going through public records as we speak. So in terms of that, but yeah,
and if I could add to that for a moment, I think we all can agree there has been times in the history of the commission where there has been a loss of public trust. And we need to take that loss of public trust very seriously. And that means when we're looking at codes of ethics and looking into any concerns or potential violations that people are bringing up, I think in order to maintain and actually to build that trust again, we need to have high levels of integrity that looks at every potential complaint that comes forward at the commission.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to do something with this code. It says commissioners are not to communicate with people not registered as lobbyists who represent interests that could be impacted by ACC decisions. That's pretty broad. It's either clarify the code or, actually investigate. But let's move on. Finally, I want to put up some information on the upcoming public hearings at the commission and how to get information from both APS and the Corporation Commission. For those out there who are thinking maybe they do want to have a say in this APS rate case, what would you tell them?
I would say it's incredibly important for your voice to be heard in front of the commission, and commissioners need to hear from you. Our world is changing, the electric grid is changing, and the way that we develop rates and maintain reliability is changing rapidly. And the risks of failing to adapt to a changing world means higher rates for customers and less reliability and resiliency for our grid. So I encourage all Arizonans, if they care about their bills, if they care about the future of their households, their families, their businesses, I encourage them all to speak up at the upcoming public comment sessions.
That's what I always encourage folks to do, is to get involved, make their voice heard. And that can be done at the commission. You can actually call in remotely as well to make it a little bit easier, particularly for folks that live outside of Maricopa County.
You're talking about during the public hearing.
During the public hearing, folks.
They can do a remote call.
Do a remote call. It's much more effective to come in person. It's always better to be there face to face. But if that creates a difficulty for someone, they can phone in. They can call in remotely through WebEx as well.
No, not a lot to add other than to say that go to the commission's website. It has a lot of good information. You can go to the docket and actually look at all the filings, the pleadings. Like I said, it's similar to a court, and the docket's like the clerk of the court. I would also add, you can write, send an email to one of the commissioners or all of them, and it will get docketed. And then also look to see when the forums are taking place. Go to the website to find out when they're going to take place, so you can participate either in person or, as Justin said, by phone.
SWEEP is doing their part. Karen, is there a watchdog out there or an advocate that you would recommend someone go to if they want to get some guidance here?
There are also a lot of other organizations that focus on different, areas of the rate case that are going to put information on their websites. So look at some of the interveners in the case as well. So groups like SWEEP, Sierra Club is an intervener, groups like Vote Solar, groups that like Wildfire that focus on limited income issues and preventing, worsening economic impacts.
Yeah.
All of these groups are going to have information on their website that make it easy for people to know where to look. So I encourage folks looking there as well.
I want to say, as we end, regarding the upcoming case, APS says in a written statement, in part, the reliable electric service customers expect comes from maintaining and growing the grid. APS invests more than $1.5 billion a year to do that. Our rates today are based on costs from 5 years ago. A lot has changed since then. It's critical that we continue to strengthen our infrastructure to protect against extreme weather and also support Arizona's growing demand for energy. Our request also focuses on ensuring customers have the energy they need when they need it. Karen, Bill, and Justin, thank you so much for just lending your voices to this important discussion. I'm convinced this is the decade of the Corporation Commission. This is their time. There is so much at stake, and I hope we as journalists and as citizens, we can shine a bright light on the decision makers and the decisions. Let's make the Corporation Commission a household topic across the state. Tell us what you think. You can go to connect@12news.com, or you can email me at jdana@12news.com. I'm on the socials where you can find our stories and updates as we cover power and influence in Arizona. Thanks for joining us.